Hi, everybody. This is Ruth Fazal here, and I'm here together with a friend of mine, and actually a very dear friend, but someone we've not really been in touch with that much in the last few years. And Huw Priday, who is sitting there in his rather cold place there in Wales, in the UK. And Huw sang The Voice of God in Oratorio Terezin. And so I really wanted you to meet him because I really feel that Huw carries something very, very special. And I think probably that is just the best way to introduce Huw would be to tell you that when we were going to perform the oratorio, and I was looking who was going to be the soloist for the voice of God, and a tenor, which I think surprised some people that I wrote God to be a tenor, and I have my own reasons for that. And so I was really trying to find the right voice, because it was a particular kind of voice that I was wanting, but I didn't really know what that was. I knew what it wasn't. And so the guy who was helping me with the choir in Toronto, he came to me all of a sudden. He said, "I think I've found the voice for you," and he played me this beautiful song called "Healer of My Heart," and which was really, really interesting. And I said, "Wow, this is it." So then somehow we managed to get in touch with Huw, and then Huw was coming over to North America and was going to be in Boston, and it was there that we met for the first time. So, Huw, how was that? And what led up to that, and what led you to even say yes to the idea of singing the oratorio?
Well, first of all, Ruth, it's great to be with you and to share my memories of how we connected and the journey with Terezin. It was such a special time for
It
all of us.
was. Mm-hmm.
Remarkable. Um, well, I've learned things here just in the first few minutes that I didn't know. I didn't know about Kirk being the one that first heard me sing "Healer of My Heart." I didn't know that that was the catalyst for this.
Mm-hmm.
So, or if I did, I'd forgotten. Um, but as for how I came to be involved, or how I accepted your very kind invitation, for me it was a very significant moment because many years earlier, uh, I had an encounter um, with God, which totally changed my life. And I could see now totally changed the direction of my life. One of the things that happened to me at that time, when I had that encounter, was that suddenly I felt such a profound love for the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a supernatural thing. I mean, it had never been there before.
Right. Yeah, I
And
can
here I
imagine.
am committing my life to God in service to Him. And suddenly, this sense of wanting to connect with Israel,
Mm.
wanting to go there, wanting to meet Jewish people. And I hadn't met anybody. I mean, I grew up in the backwaters of West Wales. And, I just didn't, my paths didn't cross with even in my school. I'd never met anybody of the Jewish faith.
Mm.
So that happened to me back in the very late 70s. And then in the 80s, in 85, God took me to Germany and gave me a vision. That's all I can describe it as. It was so clear, so powerful. I saw something uh, in the spirit that I didn't understand. Um, but again, I knew somehow it was connected with Israel and with the tribe who of course led worship.
Mm-hmm.
Very significant. So yeah, just a remarkable time, and I remember very clearly thinking when you extended the invitation to me that this was going to be the first opportunity that I had as a follower of Yeshua to engage in something that had been in my heart to do for years. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but you provided that vehicle for me.
Can I ask, what were you doing in Germany?
Well, it was my very first professional job as an operatic tenor, and I was there with the Welsh National Opera Company, and we were doing a performance. Although it was in the opera house, it was a concert performance of Mozart's Grand Mass in C.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, for me,
Beautiful piece.
oh, it's absolutely glorious. And that really was the focus of my work in Europe. I was with a company called Lees Askenas, based in London, one of the oldest agents in Europe. And I used to travel across Europe singing these great oratorios. But here we were, Sir George Scholti was conducting.
Wow.
And Kiri Takanoa was the soloist, the soprano. I remember that's the first time I'd ever heard her sing, apart from recordings.
Right.
And I didn't understand the significance of all of this until years later. But I was there working with the Welsh National Opera. It was the European Youth Orchestra were playing. I was doing what they call extra chorus work. So although I wasn't a member of the opera company, the Welsh National Opera Company, I used to freelance, and every now and again they'd employ me to sing in some of the big operas that they were putting on, where they needed a sort of tour de force and additional singers. So I'd just pop in and do a show or an opera. Right. This time it was a concert.
Yeah. Beautiful. So then it was quite a bit later that this had you realized the significance of it.
Yes, it was. I felt now then it's been a long journey for me. God called me out of professional music in the late 90s. But during the 90s, I'd been praying and just seeking him about this vision. And it was starting to unfold. So by the time you contacted me, or the time we met, I was already, I sort of laid my professional career down, and I was pursuing God and asking him to lead me in his ways, and what his purpose was for my life. And then Oratorio Terezin came along. And I always remember the very first time that we rehearsed in the Performing Arts Center with the orchestra. I remember it so clearly. I remember the orchestral parts being handed out, because up until that point, we'd all been learning it off the keyboard, and you did such a sterling job in getting that done. I mean, it was incredible. It still is an incredible piece of music. But what stuck in my mind was when I first heard the orchestra play those first bars of the introduction of Terezin. Ruth, it was so significant because back in Germany in 1985, in the Alte Oper in Frankfurt, when God gave me this vision, I know this sounds crazy, but I heard a sound, a heavenly sound, but I also saw a sound. And I kept it quiet because how do you see a sound?
Well, that's what it says in the Bible. When they were at Mount Sinai, they saw the voices.
My goodness! Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's brilliant, because that's what happened to me. And that's why I kept it quiet for so long. But what I heard in the Performing Arts Center rehearsal hall was that same heavenly sound.
Mm.
The music that you created, it captured the essence of something that God had shown me all those years earlier. And I just knew in my heart that there was nothing more important for me than to be with you and with the Terezin team,
Mm.
starting out on this incredible adventure.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, very significant time.
Amazing. And so then as we moved from the the premiere performance of the piece, and even there in Toronto, like, tell us the journey of how it felt in the different places where we performed, how it felt to be singing God's voice, to be putting forth his words in the context of the Holocaust. Like, how was that for you as a person of faith, someone with a relationship with God? It wasn't just, you weren't just reading words off a page and trying to, dramatize them or anything. This
No.
this came out of your heart, and it was so clear when we hear you sing that it comes out of your heart. So how was that, and where would you say was the most significant, what was the most significant time that you sang, that you felt that?
Well, to answer your question, the first point you raised, for me, having encountered God, um, and having encountered Yeshua, it was, and I'd spent time doing what I hadn't done before, which was studying the scriptures
Mm-hmm.
and praying. And suddenly, my spiritual life, I mean, I came alive to something that I was dead to before.
Yes.
It never meant anything to me. I was brought up in a chapel upbringing in Wales. Everybody went to chapel back then. But something changed in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was starting to look at the text of the role of God and what you'd written, it resonated. This was the God of Scripture. This was the God who loved me. This is the God who I'd encountered, and so it became a very personal journey for me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed, the way that you've written this, interspersing the poems of these precious children that lost their lives in the camps, interspersing them with God's word, it became incredibly moving, and I saw the heart of God in a way I don't think I'd seen before. It was the way that he was pouring out his heart of love for his people.
Yeah.
And it was breaking my heart, because it was the enormity of his love. And it was breaking, yeah, it was just the whole process of seeing how much he loves us,
Mm.
and how broken he was at what was happening
Yes.
to his people
Yes.
during this time. And there were moments in there that I found incredibly difficult to sing. That there was that wonderful duet with the voice of suffering,
Yes.
and the portrayal of God dying. And I remember the way you wrote it was so full of significance and meaning, and
Mm.
just it seemed to capture God's heart so wonderfully at that moment. So it was incredibly moving for me. And as to the significance of each performance was different. What you'd written was very complex musically. It was an incredibly complex piece. And I mean, I'm still astounded at what you've written.
Well, I have to tell you, I am too. I mean, it was as much of a surprise to me as to anybody. When I listen to it now, I was just listening to the last movement. I just put it actually up on Facebook, just the last movement, and I'm so glad I waited to write it. It was like swirling around in my head for weeks, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't know how do I get this, and I still don't know how I did. I
Wow.
still don't know. There's so much about that piece that God really, he really led me through it very much.
Well, it's just incredible, and I believe with all my heart that it hasn't even really begun its journey yet.
Wow.
I really felt that at the time, and I believe that there's an incredibly powerful message that can be brought to a global audience through what you wrote, and it's needed now more than ever, I think, in the world in which we live. And it's a message of incredible hope and love, and also of overcoming
triumph,
tremendous adversity.
Yes.
And you know, we had the privilege, didn't we, of meeting some Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
And
right.
that to me was, that was such an integral part of the whole Terezin journey, to meet people who had seen things that human beings should never see, who had witnessed the inhumanity of man in ways that it wasn't inhumanity, it was just pure evil.
Yeah.
And yet, somehow, they survived. I know millions didn't.
Yeah.
But it was just an incredibly powerful and deeply moving experience, particularly to sing the role of God. There was one place or one country that stands out above all the other places that we performed Terezin in, and I'll come to that in a minute. But there was also a humorous side to it, and I shall never forget Carnegie Hall. I mean, it's every singer's dream to perform at Carnegie Hall. You know, and they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And they say, well, practice, man. But prior to the Carnegie event, if you remember, I'd had an accident in Wales and I'd fallen down a manhole cover and I damaged my left leg and I'd smashed my knee. So it was one of the funniest things, because I had some Welsh friends in the audience at Carnegie Hall, and they said they had to laugh when they saw God walking onto stage with a limp. And I was determined not to miss that performance. But as for the most profound impact it had on me was when we went to Israel.
Yeah.
And the 3 performances we did there, I will never forget. First one was in Tel Aviv, wasn't it?
Yeah, on Holocaust Memorial Day. I mean, that was amazing in itself, that, you know, when we're putting all the dates together and the availability of everybody and the availability of the halls, that's where it ended up being the first performance on the 5th of May, 2005, 555.
555.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Really, really amazing.
But, you know, the venue was wonderful. We played with the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra, I think.
That was the Israel Chamber Orchestra, yeah.
Israel Chamber Orchestra. Yeah. I mean, it was just superb. You know, the musicianship was incredible. And I think by then we'd done a number of performances, and it was sort of really gelling
Yeah.
from an artistic perspective.
Yes, that's right.
And I remember just the as it came to a conclusion, that tremendous climax to the whole piece, and then silence, and nobody moved, and it seemed that there was such a presence, a holy presence in that theater,
Mm.
and nobody. It was like nobody knew how to respond. It was just something so beyond this world that had just happened. And then suddenly, if you remember it, there was this spontaneous, rapturous sort of applause, and people shot to their feet, and
Yeah.
just it was like the human heart wanted to express such gratitude and joy at what they'd encountered. And
Right. Well, those final words that you sing, see your salvation comes, and his reward is with him, his recompense
yeah,
before him. You shall no more be called forsaken,
yes,
but you
yep,
will be called sought out. Yeah, I mean
powerful.
it's such a declaration to make at the end there, and I think as you say, it's so interesting when you're talking about feeling the heart of God when you were singing, and so many times you were going like this with your arms, and it's very interesting because in a sense it's that huge hug of God, that huge gathering when he that he's gathering them in. And when you were singing, I remember you singing the words, "O Ephraim, O Ephraim." It's how can I give you up, O Ephraim? You can't.
Yeah,
And that there's this, and that in the sense is this incredible love and heart of God, that he is committed to his people,
yeah.
and he can't give them up because he's faithful, and he's faithful to all of his promises. I mean, what do you do with that?
I was just looking at the one of the first things I sang in Terezin. When Israel was a child,
I
I
loved it.
loved him.
Mm,
And then it goes on a little bit later. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk.
yes.
I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that
Yeah.
I healed them.
Yes.
Ah,
Well, it's such a picture not only of his people Israel, but also of us.
yes,
All of us, that we, the not even recognizing the role that God plays in our lives. And until that point when all of a sudden our eyes are open for whatever reason,
yeah,
and that's really really amazing. I remember too, there's that amazing dialogue in it's when you're singing from Isaiah, and uh, the the children sing that part where they say, my God, why
yes.
have you forsaken me?" And I someone inserted that right into the middle of that, and just you know talk about so quiet in the hall. And I
Yes,
think every time, because how can you hear that cry coming from a child or from children? And I think even for them to sing that, I kind of, often wonder what would be going on in their hearts as children
yes.
to be singing those words. But
Uh,
tell me a little bit, Huw, about your vision for for Oratorio Terezin. I mean, that I'm bringing this all back, and I'm focusing on this. It's kind of a weird reason in some ways why I'm focusing on it so much, and I think I tend to um, avoid going back on things that I've done, because it's always the next thing that God's given me to do, and I don't want to pull this out again and look at it. But the reality is, after those concerts in New York, there was a huge debt, and that debt still exists. And this to bring the piece to the fore, and just to kind of look at it again and say, this debt should not be here. And who knows why things don't happen the way you think that they were going to. You feel that God was saying, that something was going to, that it would be paid off and all the rest of it, and then it's not. What
Yeah.
do you do with that? And it's like in anything where we feel we've heard from God, and then it doesn't seem to happen.
Yeah.
But I know His timing is perfect in that. But what you said, you feel that this is just the beginning.
Yes, I do.
So
Well,
can you elaborate on that a little bit and on some of the connections that you have, with I know
yes.
with Russia and places.
Well, it's very interesting, Ruth, because I thought the last time that you and I had actually met was in Jerusalem in 2012. But I
I think
think,
you're right. I think
I,
you're
yeah,
right.
I,
Yeah.
I think so. I
Hmm.
know I'm a little bit grayer than I was back in 2005, but the old brain cells are still working. Um, and I came, I'd been in Haifa the night before, and I really needed to come and see you because I felt that God was really putting it on my heart to take Terezin to Russia.
That's right.
And I came to see you, if you remember, and we spent the day together.
Hmm.
And I remember you clearly saying to me, "Well, Huw, I'm done with Terezin now. I've done what God's told me to do. I'm going to move on." Exactly what you just said. And, and so but if you want to take it out, it's in the public domain. If you use it as however God leads you to do it.
Mm.
But I seem to remember you saying, "But you're going to need a lot of money."
I
So,
was probably really feeling that at that time.
oh, bless you. Well, we know what a sacrifice it was for you at the time. I remember that, in the prayer times we had before it was ever launched, and I don't think people realize that, that the personal sacrifices that you made in order to bring this work to life. But God is faithful, and you're going to see that recompense very soon. I believe it. Now, the significance for me, to answer your question as to how I know, firstly, because that vision that God gave me in Wiesbaden in 85, it was very powerful. Uh, Subsequently, years later, I realized that Sir George Sholti lost all his family in the concentration camps during the Second World War. Um, the intendant of the Opera House in Frankfurt was a Jew. He lost his life under Hitler.
Mm.
So there was a significance to where God gave me that vision. And
Interesting.
then showing me the sound, which is crazy, but hearing that sound, and then again in 2005, hearing that very same sound in Toronto in the Performing Arts Centre, that spoke to me very powerfully. Then, since our meeting in 2012, I've not been able to let it go. I just had to pray about Terezin. It's never left me. The impact of it. I keep meeting people. And the vision that God gave me was that there was a time when great darkness would come to Europe.
Mm.
Now, this was back in 85. I didn't have a clue
Right.
about where we would find ourselves now
Right.
in a world in 2020 where pretty much the whole of the arts community globally has been shut down. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, particularly in Europe and other parts of the world, I'm sure. But I know firsthand what's going on in Europe. And so, out of my prayer for Terezin, again, a significant thing happened to me just over 18 months ago. I shared this with you last time. I had a near-death experience. I was severely electrocuted for 20 seconds on the mains electricity supply. I shouldn't have survived, apparently. And that rendered me absolutely useless. I couldn't do anything. And I couldn't breathe. It damaged my lungs. It damaged the nerve endings in my chest and around my heart. And yet, in my recovery process, which also included chronic fatigue, God called me to Berlin at the lowest point of my life, at the point where I could not even speak, let alone sing. I could not walk from one end of my bungalow to the kitchen. I had to crawl because of chronic fatigue. And yet God called me to Berlin on a very specific date that was the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And a very close friend of mine had the invitation to preach in a church in Berlin. Mm. And he, immediately he'd had that invitation, he invited me, not knowing about the severity of my accident. When I was on the train from Berlin airport to the hotel that they booked for me, people just helped me. I mean, I couldn't have done it without people's help. And it was like everywhere I turned, there was help. Wow. And I think, this is amazing, but I knew God wanted me there. And I downloaded an app, a tourist app of Berlin. And it was on my phone. And I felt just prompted to open it on that train journey. And when I did, there was a history section. And I clicked on the history section and I found out that the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall was not the only anniversary of that following day. The very same day that they were commemorating the collapse of the wall in Germany was the 81st anniversary of Kristallnacht. Wow. And I felt God say to me, "Here for my people." Mm. And since that incredible weekend, after that, I had a miraculous healing took place in my body, which was inexplicable. And since then, I have had so many invitations to go back to Berlin, so many contacts with different people connected to Berlin. And God is not finished with Berlin.
No, I totally relate to that. And it's so interesting because Berlin is kind of on my list of places that the Oratorio was supposed to go, and it didn't yet.
Yet, it's going there. Mm. I know. So when you emailed me about 3 weeks ago, it was so funny because, you know, I'm not on social media. I closed my website down.
Tell me about it.
And how did you connect with it? It was brilliant.
Well, you changed because your email address was connected to your website, which now doesn't exist. And so I'm thinking, how the heck am I going to get a hold of you? And then I thought to myself, well, what do people do when they need a new email address? Mostly they create a Gmail address. So I just put huwpriday@gmail.com. Sure enough, there you were.
So, you know, it was brilliant. It was just, I was amazed to hear from you because we haven't been in touch. We both, no. You know, the Lord's just taken us in different directions. But here we are. He's reconnected us at such a significant time. Yeah. And out of so much prayer since 2012, what you shared with me on our first Zoom meeting just a few weeks ago, I just jumped for joy because I thought, thank you. This is an answer to prayer. Ruth hasn't forgotten Terezin. Ruth just had a very strong prompt to pick this up because now is the time. Now is the time for it to be heard. And I'm connected with people that, again, it's been a big part of my journey, has been laying down a lot. Laying down a successful international career with Lee Askenas out of obedience, and that's the precious thing, that the God of Scripture is the God who loves his creation. And that's what I saw so profoundly right the way through Terezin. And he has a plan and a purpose for mankind. He created us, and he's going to resolve this. There's so much suffering, so much pain, so much heartache
Mhm.
in the world. But I think the message that Terezin has for the world, Jew and Gentile, is incredibly important. And now is the time for that message to be heard through such the powerful medium as music. It's God's gift to mankind.
Right. So I'm trying to, I mean, aside from future performances, I'm really wondering whether if there are other ways that I can actually present the oratorio, and so I'm sort of thinking through with the whole idea with using film and that kind of thing. So that's something to be praying about. And
Well, I think that's something that you and I need to have a private conversation about, because
sounds good to me. Yeah, that
some
sounds
of the
great.
conversation just in the last week, the people that I've been connected with who are talking exactly the same language, because of the state of the arts globally, we're now looking at, okay, in the interim, until live performances are allowed again, which they
Mm-hmm.
will be, how do we use media? And I've connected with a brilliant lady who was a communications expert in the US Navy, who is, she loves the Lord with all her heart. And she's laid down everything to pursue a vision that God gave her many years ago.
Hmm.
And connections, Ruth, are incredible. So we need another conversation very soon.
That's very great. Well, look, you know what? I'm going to sort of tie this one up,
Okay.
um, and um, and just thank you so much for being with us and sharing your heart. I just feel that you are a wealth of inspiration, and I appreciate that so much. So I will say goodbye.
Okay.
We can carry on chatting, but later. But thank you so much for this. I really
You
appreciate it.
you're very welcome, and it's been a great joy and privilege to share this time with you and those that are listening or watching. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you.